I'm George White. I'm Chief Innovation Officer, and I'm joined by Sean Gummery, who is our SVP of Experience Strategy and Service Design. We're be happy to welcome you all to this track. I think it's going to be a great day or two of talks, and we're really looking forward to seeing what the panel is talking about that starts, and then how we sort of continue with the theme of innovation structure and governance throughout the day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I'm standing up here. So what Sean and I do every day is basically help organizations make progress. Our job as strategy and design and development consultants is to go in and help them figure out what they should build, but more importantly, why they should be building it, as well as how they should be building it. And one of the things that we found over the last few years is that there's a lot of things going on in terms of why businesses are starting to focus on innovation so much. I mean, everybody's, R&D has existed for years, innovation's existed for years, but we're really starting to see that people are focusing more and more and more on this. And we think that basically there's a bunch of things that are happening that are causing this to happen. One of the things is technological change, right? So every day there's a new technology that you take advantage of, or you should be taking advantage of, or think you should be taking advantage of. One of them is that we've changed the focus on customers and consumers. So in the past, you could always find a way to lower the bar, to optimize, to get closer to being able to deliver faster, better, cheaper. But that's actually starting to shift a little bit. So you can still do that. You can still squeeze a little bit more out of the bottom end of things. But we're now starting to have to compete on consumers and customers and our end user as much as we were competing on product features and optimization in the past. There's a lot of pressure that's being generated by, I saw this yesterday and I'd never seen it before, but FANG, F-A-A-N-G, right? So you've got your Facebooks, your Amazons, Apple, Google. We have these big companies, these really, really big companies, and they have infinite resources, and they're now pushing into all of our businesses in ways that we don't expect. And so that's creating a lot of pressure from the top. And from the bottom, you have a lot of startups, you have a lot of entrepreneurship, and that's creating pressure from the bottom. And so for many organizations, this means that innovation is now key. You're worried about being disrupted from top or bottom. You're worried about change happening in terms of the types of products you're delivering. You're worried about your consumers or customers walking away from you. So with all that, we think that innovation has become something that people really are concerned about every single day. All right, so I'm really going to quickly talk about a framework that we like to use. This is a really simple framework. It's called the Explore, Exploit Continuum. And basically, it's got two poles. On the one side, you have exploration. This is what you can think of as innovation, play, fuzzy and chaotic stuff. It's non-deterministic. It's kind of risky. On the other side, you've got exploit, which is optimize and process and understanding quantifiable data, and it's predictable and it's a safe bet. And one of the things that's really interesting about this is it's a really simple continuum. If you think about the idea that where you are on in this sort of end-to-end, it can kind of give you an idea of what your organization looks like and its organizational culture. What I find is that a lot of businesses are actually really close to the exploit side of things. They've gotten really good at optimization. They've gotten really good at process. They've gotten really good at being able to be mechanistically shipping. And this morning they talked about sustaining innovation in the keynote. And that's what people are really good at. They're good at making their existing thing better. But a lot of organizations are not so good at the exploration side of things. They're not so good at this other end of the pole where there's more risky bets, where there's less optimization, where there's more sort of failing to learn or failing to change. There's also some danger at each one of these poles, right? So an organization that's set up to be fully exploiting will miss its opportunities when they come along. It's going to be very good at staying in the niche it's in, but it's going to be not so great at changing up what it's doing. On the explore side of things, if you're chaotic and constantly exploring, you're going to find that, in fact, you cannot settle down and you cannot optimize, and that means you can't grow, typically. One of the things that also comes from all this is that basically there's a sort of a tension between these two, right? So one of the reasons that innovation teams often fail is that they're not aligned with that core organization. They're not aligned with the organization that understands how to deliver, and when they have to push their new product, new service in, they find that the team that's designed to actually say, hey, we're just going to deliver on the same thing over and over again is not ready to take that. At the same time, you often have problems finding people who can come from the traditional organization, understand your business, and move to the explore side of things. So there's danger at the poles and the extremes. What we're really looking for is for businesses that start to try and orbit around the center, that they can kind of move back and forth between the explore and exploit poles and understand how to basically know when they need to be exploiting and know when they need to be exploring and to balance those two out. So that's kind of just one of the frameworks. I'd like to go ahead and get us started because we are actually, like I said, starting a little bit late. And I'd like to give this next panel a little bit of time. So I'm going to bring up Ashish Busare. And Ashish is actually, sorry, I have to change my thing here. So Ashish is the chief scientist and co-founder of Pre-Scouter. I did that before. He is basically a network. They're a network of 3,000 PhD scientists and industrial experts who work with Pre-Scouter's 500 clients. Prior to Pre-Scouter, he was management consultant and served in the Peace Corps. That's cool. Having lived in the near Mount Everest in Nepal. So I want to hear some climbing stories because obviously that's a big thing. All right, so why don't you guys come on up, David and Rowena? Oh, actually, before we get started, just a couple quick things. So we have about 40 minutes per talk. I'm going to try and keep the speakers to about 35 minutes. We'll try and make some time for Q&A. If you have questions, please raise your hand, and Sean will come out and meet you. If you look at your calendar schedules, you'll see that some of the talks have a star next to them. I just want to make sure that you know that if you go to the star talks, that's credit towards earning the certificate that the program is offering. Again, we want this to be interactive. We want this to be communicative. The whole point of doing this conference is to meet people and talk. So if you have questions, please let us know, and we will come out into the audience and let them get asked. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashish.
Okay, thank you. Well, before I introduce the speakers for today, I'd like to just quickly have a quick intro to why we're having this conversation. We hear a lot about the speed that we should fail. I've never heard anyone say, let's fail slowly. But if you're going to fail, you should fail quickly. The question that we're bringing to the table is there a way to prevent failure before you reach that point in the project? And although it may sound like a nebulous topic or concept, we hear it time and time again from the people that we work with that preventing failure is one of the biggest challenges that innovators deal with. Today, our panel speakers bring decades of experience to the table from working on many, many innovation projects within their respective organizations. They have brought many decades of experience, and I'm going to now present to them, to you today, both of the speakers. First, we have Rowena Pullan, recently completed 9 years at Pfizer. While at Pfizer, she served as the strategic innovation leader, as well as the vice president for R&D of wellness, and the vice president of R&D for their supplement franchise. Prior to her time at Pfizer, Rowena worked for Procter & Gamble for over 20 years. Her roles included global franchise director and regional director of R&D of healthcare. Our second panelist today is David Kusuma. David is vice president of research and product innovation at Tupperware Brands Corporation, where he is responsible for leading R&D and technology research divisions. His focus is to bring leapfrog conventional boundaries of innovation through open innovation and by developing new technologies and materials to create game-changing product solutions. Prior to working at Tupperware, David worked at GE Plastics as a global manager and in the design and engineering vehicle teams. Prior to working at GE, he worked at Bayer Material Science. Let's give a warm welcome to our panelists today. Okay, so we're going to just hop into kind of your personal styles for managing innovation projects. Could each of you provide kind of your personal styles for how you manage innovation projects and how you assess a concept's viability?
Want me to start?
Yep, sure.
So I'm going to echo some of the stuff that was said in the keynotes this morning. So you have to know what, and then I spend a lot of time on how in the context of culture. How do you create an environment and a culture that's going to enable all the people in your organization to thrive and to innovate? Because if you're the leader, you can't be driving everything. You have to have the key people in your organization driving it, and so it's really about culture. And for me, you want to really drive a culture of curiosity. Why? Why does the consumer do it that way? Or why do they want this? Or, but why? Curiosity. And then you also want to sponsor a culture where people can debate things. We often see debate as my point of view versus your point of view. But if you go and you do debating at college, it's more about providing different points of view that can then come together and hopefully provide a third way that's even better. So that would be, for me, that's really around the critical thing is you get the what sorted out, what are we going after, but then really create a culture that will enable everybody to contribute to those what's in the most biggest way by driving curiosity and by hopefully driving good discussion and good debate.
Okay. So at Tupperware, we actually divide up our roles and responsibilities. There was a time when we used to focus on our markets, and then the R&D team, which is more of the innovation team. We always find this to be much harder to staff, because we need people who are both technically astute, but also highly creative, and these people are not easy to find. And within that, we actually have defined, together with senior management, 5 technology areas that we're interested in that will help lead products of the future for our company. And every project or every technology that we are developing has to fit within this roadmap. So it's important for us to kind of manage this. We're not looking for incremental innovation. Here's where we really focus on what is game-changing, what's revolutionary, what's something that the market doesn't already have, so that when customers want to buy it, it doesn't matter how much money they're willing to pay, they still have to come here to get it. Incremental innovation we leave to product development in the stage gate process. Hopefully that's the time when all of the technical questions have been answered and we can move forward towards industrialization.
Great, thank you. The next question or topic is on the voice of the customer. So when does the voice of the customer enter into your projects? And how do you really listen to the voice of the customer? Rowena?
Beginning, middle, end, frequently, always. Especially in the healthcare world, the consumer healthcare world. So this is products that you can walk into Walgreens and buy, or in my previous life at Procter when I worked in other categories. You've got to touch base with them. It's constant. It needs to be constant. They're the ones ultimately going to make the decision. They're the ones ultimately going to put their money, on the give it to the cashier and take home the product that you have developed for them. And so making sure that you connect in with them all the time is critical. And part of the reason I think is, more than anything else, we get into our own bubbles. And scientists can really get into their own bubbles. And you really want to avoid the scientists going on about this cool technology and the consumer's like, yeah, so what? What does it do for me? And there are, it can happen both ways. One of the stories I love is that text messaging was originally put into mobile phones by the engineers so that they could talk to each other. And they weren't going to tell the company about it. And they didn't see it as a feature. And I don't know, but I certainly know that I communicate with my children almost exclusively by text message today. So that was an idea where when they put it in, it was a technology idea. But when they started talking to consumers and started understanding consumers, they started realizing this was a really powerful thing they had. And so that constant iteration, that constant discussion becomes really, really important. Partly because also consumers often don't know what they want when it's really innovative. They can't describe something they have no knowledge about. So you have to have the conversation with them and feed them clues, and that idea of co-development, co-understanding becomes really critical. So to me, the consumer, the customer, both, and or have to be in the room pretty much all the time.
So at Tupperware, we're kind of a different kind of company. Most of you have heard about the Tupperware party. We have access to, I don't know what it is, it's almost like 3.5 million sales force. So we do, we put on everyone's annual objectives that they have to actually attend a Tupperware party at least once a quarter. They don't have to reveal who they are, but the interesting thing is just to kind of sit back and listen. And to see what everyone's reaction is to new products being presented. So that's at one level. At another level, we do quite a number of ethnographic research studies. A number of years ago, we had focused on Latin America because These were some of our emerging markets. We actually did a whole series of what we call home visits. So we would kind of work with the sales force, line up some of the homes to visit. It's interesting because the project teams, they all want to crowd in, but people don't want armies in their homes. So you have to kind of divide them up, and you've got to kind of, keep it to a level that makes a lot of sense. The key is to kind of observe. You don't want to ask too many questions, and you certainly don't want to prepare them. The important thing is, before you come to a home visit, you want to make sure that they don't clean their homes and clean their kitchens. The whole point is to actually see, how they actually live, how they actually use the spaces that are available with them, for them. How they store their food, how they prepare their food, what do they do with their waste and their garbage, and then look for, gaps, look for opportunities where we can introduce a new product to make their lives easier. So we do that at that level as well. The third level, which we're just kind of getting into, is that there are resources available that do this type of video ethnographic research. I don't know whether any of you have ever tried these, but we like these things a lot because when you're working on new technologies that are maybe a little bit more outside of what customers are used to, especially from our offering of products, we can get early feedback. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and maybe within about a week or so, the turnaround is extremely fast.
Yeah, just to build on that, we've used a similar technology, and we had a new package that we were going to offer a product in, and so we were having people use it for the first time on the video and talk while they used it, and they had usage instructions, but it was really interesting to see how some of them didn't read the usage instructions. They said they had them and they put them down, and then they started trying to open it, so that was already a good signal. Another one was they read the usage instructions and they actually read them incorrectly. So that was another it's kind of like, we got to think about how do we write these in a way that people don't read them incorrectly. And my favorite was, we had an individual, this is a package, with a product in it. He had his penknife out trying to get this thing open, and I can assure you that was not the way it was designed. But by doing the video, sessions, we found all that out up front, and we could make adaptations and work on how do we make how do we make the usage instructions better and stuff up front before we actually put out real product into, these were prototypes, but before we put out products.
So I could just speak loudly, that's fine. So it sounds like the customer feedback loop is critical to the process innovation pipeline. How quickly do you all iterate from the customer feedback loops that you get?
So some of it will depend on what the iteration is. I have story, if I can, that I'll tell around. We had created a product that we really needed people to take daily. And they needed to take it daily for the first couple of weeks to really start to see a benefit. And this is in the healthcare space. And, so we had blister packs, which were needed in order to maintain the stability of the product. And we did the, classic. We put Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, on the back. And these were typical rectangular blisters. And we sent them out to people. They used them. We did a lot of follow-up with them. We sat down with them individually. And we had a whole load of consumers who said to us, the product really wasn't working for me by 2 weeks. And yet all the clinical data said this should really be working for most people by the end of 2 weeks. And we had to really dig in, and we found out rectangular pack, top left corner, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We had people who got the product on a Tuesday and waited until the following Monday to start taking it. Again, if we hadn't done that feedback and really dug in, we would never have worked that out. And, they waited. And so for them, 2 weeks in, they weren't really 2 weeks into taking the product. They were only a week into taking the product. Simple fix. We made it round. So now, when or oval, I think it ended up being oval for when we talked to our packaging engineers, but the package became oval so that when you took it out of the box, it didn't, there wasn't an obvious starting point, so you could start it immediately. So that's just an example of where if we hadn't done that feedback loop and we hadn't checked back in, and we'd just taken the data of, well, suddenly this doesn't seem to be working, and not being curious about why was it so different, in a clinical trial versus in a real life example, we would never have got to that.
Yeah, so iterations are really important when you're trying to launch new things, to try to get people's feedback. I think that one of the things that Rowena mentioned earlier, customers don't really know what they want is key. If you ask them what they want, they'll tell you what they've seen, right? Which means that other people have already done it, and you're already a little bit behind. So, the best is to actually, develop something. Don't ask too many deep questions. What could customers want? And then you show it to them. If you could show it to them, they'll tell you exactly what they like. And that way you can get that feedback loop really well. We had a project recently, well, it's not that recent anymore, maybe a couple of years ago, but we were developing an idli maker for India. Most of our products are actually designed to be global products, but we do work on a couple of regional ones. Most of you familiar with Indian food, like idlis? Are you familiar with that? It's sort of this white, soft bread. Okay, you would know. That you would eat with chutney. And, we wanted to make this very easy for people to use. We wanted to also, utilize the microwave as a viable appliance for cooking. It's not only looking at technology and materials. You also have to look at cultural aspects. And for us at that time, we had no designer from India. In fact, we had to really think about, how do we develop this product, without actually having someone on staff who knows, the cuisine and knows how to cook this really well. So I contacted our team in India. We have a team on the ground. They're mostly a sales team. And I asked them, could you put me in contact with one of, a well-known Indian chef, maybe not so well-known because, then they would be super expensive, but, someone who's up and coming. And they put me in touch with a young Indian chef who was having his own cable TV program. I don't know what his exposure was, but this guy became part of our development process. We would, iterate by sending him prototypes that he could actually test. He would send back, very, very detailed comments and recommendations, and we read through it. We didn't feel obligated to take everything that he sent back, but whatever we didn't take, we would then write him back to explain why we didn't take it back, because we did want him to be an integral part of this relationship. And it worked extremely well for us, not just from the development side, but also when we were launching the product. I flew to Delhi. We actually had this big launch because this was a major project, a major product for this area. And we had the media there, and we had this chef on site who actually did the demo. He cooked the idli, and he served it to all of the reporters in the room. I mean, it was like instant welcoming of the product. It was great.
Was it tasty?
It was great, yeah.
I think that really, just a clarification, I think the more disruptive you're trying to be, the more important it is to have that iteration and check back in. And also, the more important it is to be as hands-on and as experiential as possible. When you're doing the more, what I call sustaining, you probably know your consumer a lot well. It's that tweaks that you're trying to make things better. So I think a lot of what we're talking about is a lot more about that more disruptive end. So.
Great, thank you. Let's move topics to the technology behind, or technologies that enable you to do your job effectively. So what technologies or tools enable your team to stay on top of disruptors, competitors, and emergent ideas, thus mitigating potential failure when entering into a project?
I think a critical thing is to be very clear about what you know and what you assume. And it's very easy to assume things that actually, are wrong. You know, the praying, you know, and if you assume something, you make an ass out of you and me. And that's a really easy pitfall for teams to make, that they believe they know something and actually they're assuming it and it's not true. And so really making sure that you check your assumptions and that you focus on that curiosity and that learning culture becomes really critical. And use everybody you can to learn. Like you used the chef to help you. You can use, you know, go find partners who might be able to help you, you know, and don't just use your own network. Reach out and use other people's networks. I don't know how many PhDs you said, but I mean, that's a huge number of people at Pre-Scouter, you know, who could find you somebody who might know exactly what it is you're trying to learn about, and then you can A, learn a lot more quickly, and B, make sure you don't make any assumptions. So to me, that's a really critical piece. It's around not making assumptions, but really being clear about this is what I know, this is what I think I know, or my assumption, and then how am I going to test out that assumption? How am I going to make sure that I I go and learn whether that is real or not, or whether I have to adapt? And who's going to help me do that, you know, and who can help me to find the right people to do that?
Yeah, so, you know, I think that as far as tools, we love tools at Tupperware. We, you know, I mean, if there's any new thing out there, you know, that seems to be worth trying, we're going to try it. Because, you know, I mean, every day is a new learning opportunity, you know, and we find that even though our process is mostly homegrown, you know, there's a lot of things we can learn from other people. One of the things that you know, people think of Tupperware is that they think that we're a big company, but we're not. You know, I mean, we really function as a fairly small company, you know, with limited resources. So we've been really focused a lot over the last, you know, 4 or 5 years, really on pushing this whole process of open innovation. You know, and we use a number of open innovation networks as well. You know, we use Pre-Scouter, but we use a number of others as well. But you know, the key here is to actually develop relationships with other companies that can open up new spaces. You know, and this can give you a real strategic advantage. The key is to work with companies that are actually non-obvious. You know, so we had a couple of relationships. They're still ongoing, so you can't talk too much about it. But you know, the idea here is that you could work with another company. So, for example, someone in the automotive area, you wouldn't think as being a company that would be, you know, a direct partner for a company like Tupperware. But you can open up spaces in between where you can accomplish products, or at least product ideas, that neither company could do on their own. You know, so you actually need to feed this partnership in order to get things done. And it's the non-obvious connections that actually give you a real strategic advantage.
It goes back to a point that was made this morning about really being clear about what is the problem you're trying to solve. And if you can be really clear about what is the problem you're trying to solve, you might find that other people are trying to solve what I would call a parallel problem. They could become great partners, especially if they're in a completely different industry, because then there's no, you know, there's no competition risk and all the rest of it. But if you're really clear about the problem you're trying to solve at the highest level, that's how you can find those people. And you know, that spending time on what that, I thought the example about the incubators was a great one. I've seen that one before, but it's a really great one about if you define the problem really well, you can actually come up with really interesting and innovative solutions. And you can also find other people who are trying, you know, so they probably could have found people who were also trying to keep something warm, but not necessarily babies, and that, you know, that's how you might have been able to come up with that kind of solution. So.
Okay, great. Let's move on to company culture. Company culture dictates how we report innovation projects and failure. So I'd be curious to know how you work with your company structure to discuss projects and the failure within those projects, or maybe lack thereof, how you kind of discuss failure with your team, and how upper management sees failure in innovation projects?
So I think certainly my experience has been being really clear about the kind of innovation that you're asking the team to drive. So yes, ambidextrous, but at any one point in time. So ambidextrous for me is about what's the organization trying to achieve. But for a particular team, for a particular problem, are they being asked to come up with something that is sustaining, something that's incremental? That's a very different process. You should know your target consumer. You should know a lot about what they do and how they do it. You have a lot of your processes in place. And traditionally, at the two companies I've really worked at, that is very much a stage gate process. Okay, we know the problem. We're going to work through and see if we can solve it. And so those conversations are relatively easy. Most big corporations are relatively comfortable with that kind of approach. The more disruptive you're trying to get, the more you have to really focus on learning. I keep going back to that, learning. So this is what I think today. What do I have to learn in order to be able to say whether that is true or not? How much is that going to cost the company? When am I going to come back and tell you what I've learned and what it means? And what I've found with successful teams is they've been very good at defining the questions that they want to answer, being very clear about how much it's going to cost to answer those questions, and then coming back at that point and saying, here's what I've learned. So we were completely wrong about question number one. Our hypothesis was X, and it turned out to be A. We were right about question two. Our hypothesis was Y, and it was Y. And so we thought we were going to do this, and we were going to do it this way, and now we're having to adapt, and we're going to do something slightly different, and making sure that the company buys into that new approach. My own personal experience, I had a project a while back. The product is now on the market. You could all buy it. I'm not going to tell you what it was. And the company was really, really uncomfortable with this new product and the consumer we were targeting and the way we wanted to talk with them. But they kind of saw that, if we could get people on board, if you did the math on the back of an envelope, this could be worth a lot. And so we actually persuaded them and said, look, we'll launch online. Because so this was at P&G, but going into what we call bricks and mortar, that's an expensive process. So we persuaded the company to let us launch online. That meant their exposure was a lot smaller. And actually it enabled the learning process because we were selling to people online. One of the things we asked them when they bought the product was whether we could contact them and talk to them about their experience. And so we found a lot of people were very, it was kind of an early consumer co-creation, and a lot of people were really keen to tell us all about their experience. And that enabled us to really evolve the product and get the company comfortable because they saw the reaction from consumers. And then eventually we got to the point where they said, yeah, we want to go bricks and mortars with this now. So that was one way to manage something more disruptive, was by limiting the financial the financial risks that we were asking the company to take. It put a lot more work on the team, but it was really about limiting the financial risk. And then they were more willing to let us go try it because we found a way to do that was less expensive.
So for us, company culture is always difficult. I think for any of you who are leading technology groups in your own companies, we probably have the same issues. If you talk to senior management, research and development is an expensive activity. But for whatever reason, you never have enough money. You're always trying to do more with what you've got. And then you have senior management who expects that everything you're working on is going to be 100% delivered. And of course, we know that that's not the case. And then they go, okay, well then it should be 50% delivered, and you go, probably not that either. We're really more in the range of 10% if we're diligent. But it's a difficult case to try to get approval to spend monies upfront where the return on investment is not immediately identifiable, right? You don't know if you're going to get this return within 2 years or 3 years, or gosh, even 5 or 10 years later. These are the benchmarks that they're looking for. And then we always have senior management who wants to be too involved in projects. They would come and they would, you would explain all the different possibilities, all the different directions to arrive at the same solution, and all of them have the opportunity or the possibility at least to reach this solution. But then they start cherry picking. They start going, well, okay, this one sounds expensive. This one here sounds really complicated. This one here sounds right about where we should be. So work on this one. And you go, wait a minute, don't tie our hands too early. Because what you're pointing to may not bring, may not yield the final solution. What I'm trying to find a way to say, which I haven't really found a way, and if any of you know how to do this, let me know, because then I could learn from you as well. I just need them to get out of my way, right? And I just need them to let us do our work. So that's part of our culture.
I would also, I've also successfully used, we talked about the consumer or the customer and getting them involved and constantly talking to them. I've also used them to help me convince senior management. Bringing consumers in who have tried your prototypes, and I picked my consumers very carefully, but they were raving about this product, and they talked about how it changed their lives. That's pretty powerful. That starts to get people excited and starts to get people realizing if we can make this work. So it becomes how do we make this work as opposed to if we make it work. And so that's also that would be one tool I would talk about, certainly.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we open it up to questions from the floor? Are there any questions that you all might have out there?
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Chin. I work for the Nature Conservancy, the New York State Division. I have a question about timing of iteration in terms of establishing when something has failed or not. So one of our challenges is that because we work with ecosystems, sometimes the iteration time is a year or longer, and we're trying to figure out how to accelerate the work that we do in the face of many global sort of climate challenges, human disaster kind of challenges. How do you think about how quickly you can make this iteration or test things at a smaller time scale in order to speed up the pace of learning when you have limitations on how quickly you can do or how quickly you can actually integrate projects? Want to go first?
Sure. I think some of the tools that we talked about, using this kind of video ethnographic research would work well, but you still have to then create something that they can talk to, right? Because the whole process of how this works is you actually have to create that iteration of prototype, for example, send it to them, and then have them talk about it. Normally we would accompany that with a list of questions in a survey, and have them talk to it on video. To be done, the survey has to be ready, and then it has to be able to be sent out immediately when you have something to send out. so that we're not the normal matrix organization. We don't have a pool of mechanical engineers and a pool of designers and a pool of, marketing people, all being assigned to a project when the project gets requested, when we get a new brief, for example. We actually have people assigned to certain product categories, right? So that they know it well, they build expertise. So our categories are very specific. Cookware is a category, refrigeration is a category, microwaving is a category. And this same group works specifically on any product that is requested out of that category. So in that way, they can actually turn things around a lot faster. They're the ones who actually determine which markets to launch in first because they know the landscape of the market as well. So they're going. It's a group of multidisciplinary people. So they know the technology, they know the markets, they know the competitors. And then they can easily evaluate what comes and goes. If we can get, for example, a 1 month turnaround complete. For each iteration, your objective, I think, from a rational or reasonable point of view, should be within that margin.
So I was trying to think through how applicable these are, given that you're talking about the environment, and it's probably a lot more complex. Although, one thing is, can you build a mini ecosystem? Whether it's a terrarium or something like that, I don't know. But I mean, so that you can change things and you can have multiple versions going, and then you can change one thing in one and something different in the other, so that you can see how the iterations have an impact. That would be one. I'm trying to apply a model where we had multiple experiments going, if you like, and we would change one thing, a different thing in each experiment, and see how that had an impact. And then the other thing is modeling. Now that's really complex when it comes to the environment, but the more you can, if you start with a model that you recognize is very clumsy and clunky, but every time you have new data, you build it in, over time that model is going to evolve and become better and better. And then hopefully you will eventually get to the point where you can say, okay, change this in the model. Oops, maybe not, that's what happened. So that's kind of the two things that your question made me think about, is can I set up a series of sort of micro experiments that can help me understand impact? So, I mean, I can think of an example where I watched an older consumer tell me about how, oh yeah, my product's no problem to take. She stood at the sink, she mixed it up, and she chugged 8 ounces of liquid like she was a 17-year-old boy. And I was in awe of the fact that she could actually do that. And so, I did start asking questions about, how long have you been doing it? But it was really standing there watching her do this that sparked, hang on a minute, how many people can really do that? I can't chug 8 ounces of anything that quickly. So I think that all started with that ethnographic, actually watching them try to do something, actually watching somebody try to get dressed, or whatever it may be. I had a colleague who needed to see how people acted in the shower. Well, that you think, well, that could be. Well, she just got them to wear bathing costumes. What do you call them? Swimsuits in this country. But it was a way to get people, who were prepared to just do what they did. And okay, you could argue the swimsuit might have change something, but not really, and huge insights, that came out of that. Like just how many people stand facing the shower versus with their back to the shower? Did you know that's driven by gender? And then that starts to help you understand a whole load of other things about why they give you the feedback they give. So I would certainly start with ethnographic.
So I think your question is not so easy because, when you're looking at things related to universal design, for example, you have different levels of capability of the aging population, because depending on what is the activity that you're trying to track, people who are, people, for lack of a better word, people lose their mobility at different rates, right? And are you trying to design for the worst case, or are you trying to design for some place in between? Because if you always jump to the worst case, you may not be fulfilling the needs, I think, of people in between. So it's not an easy thing. Ethnographic research certainly will play a role. For us, we don't go and try to do this ourselves because, we don't always know the right questions to ask either. So we do work with anthropologists, and this is really important as well when we try to take into consideration things like cultures, maybe an elderly person, in Malaysia might have different needs than an elderly person here in North America, for example. I don't know, but an anthropologist could give you some insight into, what would be the right questions and what kind of observation you'll be looking for.
Great. Well, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. That's fantastic. Thank you very much.